Imagine sitting in a theater in the 1970s when a single film could terrify politicians, shake moral foundations, and spark nationwide bans. It was a decade when directors stopped obeying rules and started confronting authority. Governments panicked, churches protested, and reels were seized mid-screening. These are the 12 banned movies that shocked entire countries' films so dangerous they forced society to look straight into the mirror it feared most. Number 12. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. It was not just a movie, it was a cultural detonation. Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange arrived like a prophecy of violence drenched in style and menace. The film followed Alex DeLarge, the sadistic leader of a futuristic gang who reveled in chaos, Beethoven, and ultraviolence. Society had crumbled, morality had decayed, and Kubrick's cold dystopia felt all too real for Britain in the early 70s. Audiences were split between awe and horror. Critics praised its brilliance while tabloids branded it evil. Churches called for its banning, and newspapers linked it to real-life assaults allegedly inspired by its scenes. Police officers condemned it. Politicians declared it a public danger. The frenzy reached Kubrick himself, who began receiving threats and accusations. His family was harassed, his home was surrounded, and in fear he pulled his own movie from circulation. For nearly 30 years, it was illegal to screen A Clockwork Orange in the United Kingdom, yet the censorship only amplified its myth. Bootlegs circulated through underground screenings whispered about as forbidden art. When it finally resurfaced after Kubrick's death in 1999, the world saw not a celebration of violence, but a chilling study of control conditioning and lost humanity. A Clockwork Orange stands as one of the most banned yet most brilliant films ever, made a reminder that art once feared often becomes the truth we cannot unsee. Number 11. The Last Tango in Paris, 1972. When The Last Tango in Paris premiered, people didn't just talk about it, they screamed, debated, and stormed out of cinemas. Directed by Bernardo Bertolucci, it told the story of a grieving middle-aged man and a young woman who plunge into an anonymous affair inside an empty Paris apartment. It was emotional, chaotic, and devastating, a film about pain masquerading as passion. But to governments and religious leaders, it was the apocalypse of decency. Italy banned it outright, and its director Bertolucci was prosecuted for obscenity. His civil rights were revoked for 5 years. In Chile, the film was seized by authorities before the first screening. South Korea outlawed it for decades. Even American cities like Boston and Atlanta banned it for violating moral standards. Behind the camera, Bertolucci's pursuit of realism ignited outrage among cast and critics. Actors clashed with the director over his manipulative style. The emotional toll left scars. Yet, the film also drew standing ovations at festivals for daring to confront loneliness in a way few had attempted. The Last Tango in Paris became more than a movie. It was a battle between art and morality, between free expression and social panic. Decades later, critics re-evaluated it as a raw exploration of grief and identity, but its shadow of controversy never faded. It remains one of the most infamous works of the 70s, proof that emotional truth can be as shocking as violence itself. Number 10. Salò, or the 120 Days of Sodom, 1975. No film in history tested the boundaries of human endurance like Pier Paolo Pasolini's Salò, or the 120 Days of Sodom. Adapted from the writings of the Marquis de Sade, it transformed fascist Italy into a grotesque machine of cruelty, where power devoured innocence and obedience replaced humanity. It was not entertainment. It was a cinematic descent into hell. Governments recoiled in terror. Britain refused to grant certification, calling it an assault on decency. Australia banned it entirely. In New Zealand, possession was considered a criminal act. Even Italy, Pasolini's home country, seized prints and raided theaters. The outcry was so severe that some critics wondered whether the film should exist at all. Behind the scenes, actors wept between takes, and crew members whispered that the production felt cursed. Pasolini's own life ended tragically, soon after the premiere, found murdered under mysterious circumstances. Many believe the hatred stirred by Salò had followed him beyond the screen. For years, Salò was buried, banned, and whispered about like a ghost. But time changed its meaning. Today, scholars view it as one of the boldest anti-fascist statements in cinema history. Its horror was never meant to titillate, it was meant to indict. Pasolini showed that true evil lies not in monsters, but in systems that teach people to stop feeling. Salò remains banned in parts of the world even now, and yet it endures like a warning carved into celluloid about what happens when cruelty becomes routine and silence becomes obedience. Number 9. The Devils, 1971. When The Devils premiered, critics said they had never seen anything like it, and they meant it as both praise and horror. Directed by Ken Russell and inspired by Aldous Huxley's historical account of demonic possession in 17th century France, the film was a fever dream of faith corruption and hysteria. It followed Father Urbain Grandier, played by Oliver Reed, a charismatic priest accused of witchcraft after defying church authority. At its core, The Devils was a howl against institutional hypocrisy. It dared to show how religion could be weaponized by fear and politics, how purity could become perversion under the eyes of authority. But to censors, it was blasphemy. Britain's Board of Film Classification demanded over 10 minutes of cuts. The Vatican condemned it as heresy. Entire countries like Ireland and Italy banned it completely, while in the United States, several states refused to screen it. Behind the scenes, Russell's set was as intense as his vision. Actors fainted during production, the makeup team walked off in protest, and Warner Brothers executives begged him to tone it down. He refused. The uncut version became legendary, known only through smuggled VHS copies and whispers among collectors. The Devils was banned not for its violence, but for its audacity to question who gets to decide what is sacred. Over 50 years later, it is still difficult to see in its entirety. Yet every surviving frame burns with purpose, a reminder that truth wrapped in outrage can outlive every censor's scissors. Number 8. Straw Dogs, 1971. When Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs hit theaters, it divided audiences like a moral earthquake. Starring Dustin Hoffman as an American academic who moves to rural England with his wife, it began as a slow study of isolation but spiraled into a brutal meditation on fear, masculinity, and revenge. The story turned a quiet village into a battlefield and civility into savagery. Critics were shaken. Some called it genius. Others called it barbaric. British censors outright banned the film for decades, labeling it an incitement to violence. The controversy centered on its depictions of cruelty and the way Peckinpah forced viewers to confront their own thirst for vengeance. Religious groups protested theaters across Europe, while in Australia the film was pulled after a single screening. Behind the camera, Peckinpah was relentless. He pushed Hoffman and Susan George into emotionally raw performances that mirrored the tension behind the scenes. Studio executives feared the movie's darkness would destroy his career. Instead, it immortalized him as one of the most fearless filmmakers of the century. Straw Dogs became the conversation society tried to avoid. It wasn't about violence, it was about what happens when society forces civility to break. Today, it is regarded as a psychological landmark, dissecting male pride and suppressed rage. The film was banned because it showed what every censor feared most, that the real violence lives quietly inside ordinary people. Number 7. Cannibal Holocaust, 1979. Few films in history have sparked as much terror, outrage, and legend as Ruggero Deodato's Cannibal Holocaust. Marketed as a lost documentary, the film followed a crew of journalists who traveled deep into the Amazon to document native tribes, only for the footage to reveal unspeakable horrors. It was so convincing that Italian authorities believed it was real. After its premiere, Deodato was arrested for murder. Prosecutors accused him of killing his cast on camera. He had to bring the actors to court to prove they were alive. Yet even after his acquittal, the movie remained banned in more than 50 countries. Britain blacklisted it under the Video Nasties Act. Australia seized copies at customs. Norway banned it for 30 years. The controversy spread faster than the film itself. Behind the scenes, the production was chaotic and dangerous. The film crew battled the jungle heat diseases and their own consciences. Critics called it the most disturbing film ever made. Animal cruelty on screen deepened the outrage, prompting even horror fans to turn away. Yet Deodato insisted it was a critique of media hypocrisy, showing how journalists exploit suffering for spectacle. Over time, Cannibal Holocaust transformed from forbidden object to cult artifact. Modern directors like Eli Roth and Quentin Tarantino cite it as influence, though they admit it still makes them uneasy. It remains banned in multiple countries today. To this day, few films have blurred the line between fiction and reality so completely. Cannibal Holocaust endures as the ultimate question of the 70s underground cinema. How far can art go before it becomes the very horror it condemns? Number 6. The Exorcist, 1973. When The Exorcist hit theaters, audiences fainted, screamed, and fled into the night. Directed by William Friedkin, it wasn't just a film, it was a cultural event that collided with faith itself. The story of a 12-year-old girl possessed by a dark force felt terrifyingly real, and the realism of Friedkin's direction made it unbearable for many viewers. Lines formed around blocks across America while priests condemned it from pulpits. In the Philippines, ambulances waited outside cinemas for panic-stricken moviegoers. In the United Kingdom, several councils banned it altogether, claiming it endangered public mental health. When the film arrived on VHS, it was swiftly banned again under the Video Recordings Act. Britain didn't lift the restriction until the late 1990s. Behind the camera, the production was haunted in its own right. Fires broke out on set. Actors were injured during stunts. Friedkin blasted them with freezing air and fired guns to capture genuine fear. The film was cursed, they said, and some believed it was true. Rumors of real demonic influence surrounded it, only deepening the legend. But beneath the hysteria lay a serious story about faith and evil. The Exorcist forced audiences to question whether horror comes from the supernatural or from their own loss of belief. Critics called it obscene, then later called it sacred. Over time, it earned Oscars and the respect of theologians. It remains one of the most banned yet most beloved horror films in history. Its power lies in its honesty. It showed that sometimes what terrifies us most is not the demon on screen, but the doubt inside us. Number 5. Pink Flamingos, 1972. John Waters' Pink Flamingos didn't just break rules, it annihilated them. It was loud, vulgar, and unapologetically bizarre. Shot on a shoestring budget in Baltimore, the film followed a cult anti-hero named Divine in a grotesque competition to prove who could be the filthiest person alive. For censors across the world, this wasn't art, it was an attack. The film was instantly banned in Australia and several European countries. In Canada, it was labeled immoral and confiscated at customs. Even in the United States, local police raided screenings. Newspapers called Waters a menace and audiences fainted or ran out mid-showing. But underground fans couldn't get enough. Behind the scenes, Waters reveled in the chaos. He cast friends and locals instead of actors, transforming his home city into a stage for rebellion. Critics were divided between outrage and fascination. Some saw genius buried under the grime, others swore the film marked the end of cinema itself. Yet despite every attempt to erase it, Pink Flamingos grew into a cult phenomenon. Midnight screenings spread across universities and art houses. What censors missed was that beneath the filth was a satire on hypocrisy, the absurd moral wars of Middle America, and the human craving for attention. Waters became a symbol of creative defiance, a man who laughed in the face of censorship. Pink Flamingos remains banned in several regions, but its spirit never died. It taught filmmakers that even trash can hold truth, and that rebellion often starts with laughter. Number 4. Last House on the Left, 1972. Before Wes Craven became a household name for creating Freddy Krueger, he made something far darker. The Last House on the Left was a low-budget nightmare loosely inspired by a Swedish classic, but twisted into something raw and shocking. It told the story of two teenage girls kidnapped by a sadistic gang and the horrific revenge that followed. When it premiered, audiences were traumatized. Critics accused Craven of exploiting violence, while others hailed it as a brutal masterpiece, exposing the hidden cruelty of society. The British Board of Film Classification banned it outright. In Australia, it was declared too offensive for any audience. Even in America, theaters pulled it after protests and police warnings. Behind the camera, Craven and producer Sean Cunningham worked with almost no resources. The film's roughness made it feel documentary-like, blurring the line between realism and fiction. Viewers could not look away, yet many wished they could. It became one of the most infamous titles in the history of censorship. For decades, The Last House on the Left remained underground. VHS collectors traded copies like contraband, but time transformed its reputation. Modern critics saw it not as exploitation, but as a reflection of Vietnam-era rage and the breakdown of civility. Its banning only fueled its myth, turning a scrappy independent horror into a symbol of rebellion against sanitized cinema. Craven proved that horror could be political, that pain could mirror the real world. The Last House on the Left endures as a warning from a decade that blurred the border between art and atrocity and dared to ask who the real monsters are, the killers or the audience that keeps watching. Number 3. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. Few films in history have shaken audiences like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Directed by Tobe Hooper, it arrived with the force of a nightmare and the simplicity of truth. Marketed as being based on a real story, it followed a group of young travelers who stumble into rural Texas and encounter a family of cannibalistic killers led by the now legendary Leatherface. From its first screenings, the reaction was pure chaos. Some theaters reported fainting spells. Others were forced to cancel showings after mobs of terrified viewers demanded refunds. Critics labeled it an atrocity on film, while moral groups across Britain and Scandinavia called for its destruction. In the United Kingdom, it was banned for over 20 years. In parts of Australia and Scandinavia, its import was illegal until the early 1990s. Behind the scenes, Hooper's cast endured brutal conditions. The Texas heat reached 100 degrees, the stench of decaying props filled the air, and many of the performers suffered real injuries. Hooper's vision was to make horror feel uncomfortably real, and he succeeded far too well. The movie's grainy film stock and documentary style only heightened its power, convincing some viewers it was authentic footage. But beneath the screams lay a social commentary. It wasn't just about killers, it was about the disillusionment of a post-Vietnam America, the collapse of industry, and the decay of family values. Leatherface became the twisted face of the decade's anxiety. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre was banned because it made audiences confront the horror lurking beneath everyday life. Today, it is hailed as one of the most influential horror films ever made, a masterpiece, born from censorship fear and raw human panic. It taught the world that terror doesn't need monsters, it only needs truth. Number 2. Ilsa She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. Ilsa She-Wolf of the SS was the movie that pushed even exploitation cinema to its breaking point. Directed by Don Edmonds and produced on a shoestring budget, it portrayed a sadistic Nazi warden running grotesque experiments in a death camp. It was designed as a shock film, and it delivered more than most audiences could handle. Governments immediately moved to suppress it. In Canada and Britain, it was banned on sight. Australia outlawed it under its Obscene Publications Act. In Norway, it was considered a war crimes denial film. Even in the United States, many theaters refused to project it, fearing public outrage. Behind the scenes, Diane Thorne, who played Ilsa, embraced the role with unnerving intensity. The production crew filmed inside an abandoned set used previously for another war film, adding eerie authenticity. Critics accused the movie of crossing moral lines that could never be repaired, but others argued it was a grotesque metaphor for unchecked power. Over time, the movie developed a cult following among underground audiences who saw it as a twisted reflection of humanity's darkest impulses. It spawned sequels despite being banned in half the world, each one challenging the boundaries of censorship. Ilsa She-Wolf of the SS remains one of the most notorious banned films of the 70s because it forced viewers to face cruelty as spectacle. It dared to ask whether shock can ever serve as remembrance. It remains deeply controversial, but it exposed a truth censors feared most, that history's horrors never truly die, they just return in disguise. Number 1. Monty Python's Life of Brian, 1979. When comedy dared to mock faith, the world erupted. Monty Python's Life of Brian wasn't horror, it wasn't violence, but it was banned across more countries than most horror films combined. It told the story of a man mistaken for the Messiah in first-century Judea, turning religion on its head with biting wit and absurd humor. Upon release, protests broke out across Britain. Churches labeled it blasphemy, and councils in Wales, Ireland, and Norway banned it outright. In America, it was denounced from pulpits coast to coast. One bishop called it the most dangerous film ever made. In Sweden, posters teased its ban in Norway with the line so funny it was banned next door. Behind the scenes, the Pythons faced studios unwilling to fund their satire until George Harrison stepped in, personally financing the project. The irony was rich. A Beatle had to rescue a film about religious persecution. Even after the uproar, the cast stood firm, claiming it was never an attack on faith, but on blind dogma. Despite being banned, it became a triumph. Crowds filled underground screenings whispering lines like forbidden scripture. Decades later, critics hailed it as one of the greatest comedies ever written. What began as scandal became a statement on freedom of speech and the absurdity of censorship itself. Life of Brian endures not as a banned film, but as a battle won. It proved that laughter is stronger than fear, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is an idea told through a joke. The 70s dared, where others retreated, and these 12 banned films became proof that truth and art can frighten entire nations. Censors tried to erase them, but the world remembered. So, what do you think? Should art ever be silenced for making us uncomfortable, or is discomfort the very reason we need it? Subscribe and tell us what you believe.